Hello everyone, this is Mathfinder, the home for every math nerd's Pathfinder optimization needs. If you're new here, welcome, and we're so glad to have you. If you've been here before, welcome back, and thank you so much for your continued support. This video is a continuation of the Blastercaster series. You can see part 1 of the video linked above, and in this video we will be evaluating a variety of Blastercaster builds against the rubric that I established at the end of the first video. Let's get into it. Here's a refresher of what that rubric looks like. There are two categories: the fundamentals of what makes a good offensively oriented spellcaster, and then what you get in return for the versatility you lose along the 5 axes of power that I have talked about in the past. The fundamentals are weighted half as much as the versatility trades. There are 5 subcategories in each of the categories. For each of them, you'll get a score of a 1, 2, 3, or 4. Finally, we'll tally up the scores, weighting the fundamentals appropriately, and give a final grade to the specific caster being evaluated. I will also mention some miscellaneous comments about each of these spellcasters that doesn't fit perfectly into this rubric, but they're not going to impact the grade overall. The first build we'll be looking at is the Oscillating Wave Psychic. And man, I was surprised to see the result on this one. It is one of the lowest scoring builds of the ones I evaluated today. And that's genuinely shocking to me because I always held up the Psychic as being a good example of a Blastercaster. I will get into why I think it's still worth playing despite the low grade, but let's look at the grade first. In terms of defense targeting variety, it gets a 4 out of 4. It is excellent at this. Amped Frostbite lets it hit Fortitude. Amped Ignition lets it hit AC. The Occult spell list is naturally good at hitting Will, and its granted spells let it really target Reflex with a variety of spells that Occult wouldn't otherwise have. That, combined with whatever spells Occult does have to target Reflex and Fortitude with, makes it a 4 out of 4. In terms of brute forcing through defenses, it only has access to Sure Strike and Force Barrage, which is a 3 out of 4 because both of these are good options, but it doesn't have access to all of the options available. Damage type variety is where the Oscillating Wave Psychic actually struggles a little bit because of the forced oscillation between fire and cold. When you use fire on one of your options, your next option automatically gets the cold trait. This can really suck because oftentimes when you're getting the benefit of exploiting somebody's, say, fire weakness, you're then forced to walk into their cold immunity or cold resistance, which often go hand in hand, and vice versa. A cold weakness often goes hand in hand with a fire immunity or resistance. So it gets a 2 out of 4 in this regard due to the forced oscillation. That being said, this is not impossible to work around. Then, in terms of rider effects, it gets a 2 out of 4 because Amped Frostbite gives it a good rider effect, and the Occult spell list, when you target Will, can get access to plenty of good rider effects, but it's not really keeping up with an Arcane or Primal spellcaster. Arcane and Primal spellcasters generally have the gold standard of these effects. And in terms of generating value from low-rank spell slots, it gets a 3 out of 4. You have some of the good defensive spells like Wooden Double or Unexpected Transposition, and you have Sure Strike, which is a great way to generate low-rank value. Really, this could have been a 4 out of 4, but because Psychics lack those low-rank slots in the first place is why it ends up being a 3 out of 4. That brings us through all the fundamentals. And now for the versatility trades. How much versatility do you lose? As I mentioned in my previous video, the amount of loss you suffer for your versatility is ultimately dependent on how much versatility you have. So Occult and Divine spellcasters end up just suffering less of it when they choose to be blasters. However, Psychic seriously lacks spell slots, so there is a limitation there. You do end up losing quite a bit of versatility despite not having that much to begin with, and it does hurt, so it's a 2 out of 4. In terms of efficiency, I would say Psychics don't have the best action economy. It's not unworkable, but the big limitation is that your best turns happen when you have Unleashed Psyche, and Unleashed Psyche cannot happen on turn 1. But Explosiveness matters the most on turn 1, so there is a payoff there. And Unleashed Psyche only lasts 2 turns, so if a combat lasts more than 3 turns total, you now are stupefied for turns 4 and later of the combat, which can be really risky. On top of that, a lot of your stronger options, like say using Cyburst for the sake of efficiency, have a 30-foot range, which can really suck as a Psychic because you don't always have the action economy to get into the right place at the right time. All of that makes it a 2 out of 4. In terms of potency, unmatched. It's a 4 out of 4. Unleashed Psyche is just an excellent amount of explosiveness. And you have access to combos with Amped Ignition, Amped Frostbite, maximum rank Force Barrage, etc. that can really help your damage shine. Even a sorcerer with Sorcerer's Potency and Blood Magic still won't generate as much value off of it as you do with Unleash Psyche, so long as you're clever about when you use it. In terms of reliability, because you can target all the defenses and you have all that brute forcing going on, it's pretty hard for enemies to evade your damage. And finally, there's your sustainability. You have really limited spell slots, but ultimately you're a focus point caster. And unlike a lot of focus point casters, it's not hard for you to have more than 3 effective focus points. You have options like Strain Mind that give you a 4th focus point once per hour. You can combine that with a lot of the other once per day options to get more focus points, which means you have a lot of sustainability. Tallying up all those scores, the final grade is 21 out of 30. And yes, spoiler alert, this is one of the lowest grades I'll be giving for any of the blasters in this video. Now for a few miscellaneous comments. One of the big wins for the Psychic is that it is by far the easiest of the blasters I'm covering in this video. So if you want something that's relatively simple, but maybe not as repetitive as the Kineticist can sometimes be because it lacks those daily resources, the Psychic is the way to go. Another comment is that I specifically talked about the Oscillating Wave Psychic. A lot of the other Psychics will perform fairly similarly, perhaps a teensy bit worse in the single target case, and a little better in the AoE case. So ultimately, I didn't evaluate each of them individually, but they would probably all fall in the 20.5 to 22 score range. So all that being said, 21 out of 30. Next up is the Elemental Bloodline Sorcerer, specifically the fire or the metal elements. The remaining 4 elements are not necessarily the best blasters, so I'm not really considering them here. Fire is the better AoE damage dealer, and metal is the better single target damage dealer, but ultimately they will both perform fairly similarly. In terms of defense targeting variety, I'm giving them a 3 out of 4. This is because primal spellcasters tend to struggle with targeting will. Your only 2 real options for most of your career are Fear and Lose the Path. Both good spells, but not really on par with what other spell lists give you. You're not getting Agonizing Despair, you're not getting Vision of Death, etc. So you won't really be able to blast while targeting will. You can still target will in a pinch with debuffs, but you won't be able to blast, so I'm giving a 3 out of 4 in this regard. As a primal spellcaster, you could still target Reflex and Fortitude and AC fairly liberally. Brute forcing through defenses is a 2 out of 4 because your only 2 real options are Livewire and Horizon Thundersphere. This is not bad, this is still worth using whenever it comes up, but you're not the best at this. In terms of damage type variety, the primal spell list will give you pretty much all of the physical and energy damage types, which is something like 10 or so damage types total, which is pretty much all the damage variety you'll need. So it's a 4 out of 4. Theoretically, you can get better damage variety than this. Arcane spellcasters have it. For example, you can target all of these and also target Void. But at some point, there are some real serious diminishing returns on damage variety. The number of situations where, say, an Arcane spellcaster is performing better by being able to target Void, and a primal spellcaster has nothing else that can target equally better, those are going to be fairly minor and fairly rare. So ultimately, this is still a 4 out of 4. It's more like a 3.9-ish out of 4. In terms of rider effects, they get a 3 out of 4 because primal spells tend to have some pretty good riders. You can try to dazzle enemies, you can try to blind enemies, you can create areas of difficult terrain. You can try to move enemies around while also inflicting damage with them. There are a lot of good rider effects in the primal spell list. Ultimately, this is still a 3 out of 4 because there are ways to get more riders, and they do matter. The ability to stick a large variety of riders onto your spells is something that certain other casters are way better than the Elemental Sorcerer at, so it's a 3 out of 4 here. It's still very good. And finally, in terms of low rank spell slot value, Primal gets a lot of the really good defensive spells like Interposing Earth, Hidebound, Wooden Double, which you can use as reactions. It gets Brine Dragon's Bile, which you can use for an offensive reaction. And it also gets Lose the Path, which you can use as a controlling reaction. So you have a lot of value coming out of your low rank spell slots. Ultimately, this is still a 3 out of 4 because there are a couple of heavy hitters on the Arcane spell list that you're not really getting access to. Now, how much versatility do you lose? You are a spontaneous caster. Spontaneous casters' biggest chunk of versatility comes from their signature spells. That's where most of the versatility comes from. For example, if you were not a blaster, but you were still an elemental sorcerer, you could have had a signature heal. And for a second rank spell, you could have had a signature hidebound or a signature acid grip or something along those lines. The problem here is that if you intend to be a good blaster, you're going to be spending those signature spells on a lot of the heavy hitters on the blasting options. You're going to want Thunderstrike or Horizon Thundersphere for your first rank signature. Your second rank signature will probably be Floating Flame, although it could be one of the first two we talked about because you can only get one of them. Your third rank signature is probably Fireball, but you're still considering Lightning Bolt or Cave Fangs. When you get to your fourth rank signature, now there's probably another blasting spell you want to consider there, or you could get one of the ones you missed from the previous 3 ranks. So your signature spells are heavily taxed, and your maximum rank spell slots are often going to be trying to compete for damage type variety or save targeting variety. Between all these heavy taxes, you don't have that much room left for versatility, because you're really trying to be a good blaster, so you will lose a lot of versatility relative to, say, an elemental sorcerer who did not want to blast. So I give a 2 out of 4 in this regard. In terms of efficiency, honestly, elemental sorcerers are incredibly efficient, but I'm still giving a 3 out of 4, and the reason for that is only going to be obvious once you see whom I gave the 4 out of 4 in efficiency to. But elemental sorcerers are really efficient. You have the 1-action elemental toss. You have blood magic, which effectively gives you free actions. So at a baseline, the blood magic is giving you a little extra damage. But it can get better than that. It can give you forced movement, or it can give you a free action step, or it can give you just an extra fireball that originates from your friend's position if you combine, say, Unknowing to Ally with the Explosion of Power blood magic. Hence the 3 out of 4. In terms of potency, elemental sorcerers really are up there. Sorcerer's potency combined with blood magic means you effectively have an always-on Unleashed Psyche, with a little less upside because of how Unleashed Psyche combines with Force Barrage, which you don't have access to. But remember, your blood magic can be upgraded. It doesn't just have to be +1 damage. Later on, you can combine it with things like Explosion of Power, so a 4 out of 4 for potency. Likewise, reliability is a 4 out of 4. You do struggle with will, and in theory that should reduce your reliability, and you don't have all those brute forcing options. But the sheer amount of defense overloading you can perform over the course of a turn really easily makes up for it. At low levels, you will have turns that look like Elemental Toss and a 2-action spell, and then some point later in the turn cycle, you use Brine Dragon's Bile as a reaction. That was already 3 different d20 rolls to get your damage through. You're really reliable already, and then at higher levels, if you stack on, say, an Explosion of Power, now there's one more saving throw on your enemy that they have to avoid. This is actually a really good example of how a class can make you shine well past what your fundamentals might let you. Looking at the fundamentals, you might not think the elemental sorcerer is that reliable, and yet in practice, with all your relevant class features, you're one of the most reliable casters in the game. Then, in terms of sustainability, you get a 3 out of 4. You have a ton of spell slots as a sorcerer, but not as many as some of the other casters will be evaluating in this one. And you do pad out value really well with focus points, but because it's a 1-action spell that you use on focus points, you're actually burning through resources relatively quickly. So a 3 out of 4. You're pretty sustainable, but not the best at it. The final grade then comes out to 23.5 out of 30. As you can see, this is substantially better than the Oscillating Wave Psychic, but there are many other really good blasters in this game. Next up is the Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer, and specifically an Arcane Dragon's Bloodline. Now you will notice that the entire top half of this rubric is blue, 4 out of 4s all the way through. This is not a coincidence. Arcane is the gold standard for offensive fundamentals, so it does exceed every other spell list, and all the other lists are being measured up to the Arcane spell list. You can target all the defenses with your blast. You have Vision of Death, you have Agonize and Despair, you also have all of the good AC, Reflex, and Fortitude targeting blast that Primal gets. Brute forcing through defenses, you have Short Strike, you have Force Barrage, you have Horizon Thundersphere, you have Live Wire. We can even look past Blast, and you have even more options like all the great wall spells. In terms of damage type variety, you have all the energy damage types, but you also have Mental and Void, which, as I mentioned, is a marginal upgrade over what Primal gets. Rider effects, you have every single good blast with a Rider that Primal does, and also every single one that Occult does, which again, 4 out of 4. Low rank spell slot value, you have Short Strike, and you have Brine Dragon's Bile for an offensive reaction. And you have all of Primal's great defensive reactions like Hidebound, and Wooden Double, and Interposing Earth. And you also have all of Occult's great defensive reactions like Drop Dead or Unexpected Transposition. So all your fundamentals are just 4 out of 4 all the way through. In terms of what you gain in return for your versatility, though, is where the Draconic Sorcerer falls a little behind, and thus ultimately ends up mostly tied with the Elemental Sorcerer. How much versatility do you lose? The same problem as before, so you get a 2 out of 4. Signature spells are a little bit of a precious resource until the very highest levels, and blasting is going to strain them. You might even suffer from this a little more than a Primal Spellcaster does because Arcane casters are sort of expected to be versatile. Efficiency. Arcane can be a fairly efficient spell list if you use sustain spells, but your focus spell is 2 actions, and you don't really have a good spammable 1 action option, and that is going to be a problem for you, so you do pay for this with a little bit of efficiency. Your potency is great, 3 out of 4 because of Sorcerer's Potency at a baseline. You also have a ton of high rank slots, which really helps punching above your weight. That being said, you're a little behind the Elemental Sorcerer here, who got the 4 out of 4 there, because you don't have a baseline blood magic that increases your potency like they do. At later levels, you can still pick up Explosion of Power, but then that can come with its own consequences. For example, needing to anoint a frontliner to be able to use Explosion of Power off of. And unlike the Elemental Sorcerer, you actually will not be triggering Explosion of Power multiple times a turn. Remember, the Elemental Sorcerer can go Elemental Toss, followed by any of their Bloodline's granted spells, so Fireball or Thunderstrike, depending on whether you're fire or metal, and you will trigger Explosion of Power twice. Whereas a Draconic Sorcerer is going to be doing it once when they use their Focus spell, for example, because they don't have a good 1 action option they can just mix in. So even with Explosion of Power, you will still end up behind the explosiveness of the Elemental Sorcerer and the other 4 out of 4s that you'll be seeing later on. In terms of reliability, you get a 3 out of 4 because Arcane is so incredibly reliable at a baseline, and you have Brine Dragon's Bile to be able to do a little bit of defense overloading, and you have Short Strike for whenever that's needed. Your main focus spell is a 2-action attack roll spell, which inherently tends to be less reliable than saving throw spells. So that hurts. That's what stops you from being a 4 out of 4, whereas any other Arcane caster would fairly easily get 4 out of 4 if they had a decent saving throw focus spell, in my opinion. Finally, in terms of sustainability, you have tons of max rank spell slots, and your focus spells are fairly powerful, so they will carry you through some of the longer combats. So you get a 3 out of 4 here. You're not the most sustainable, but you're definitely more sustainable than the other options we've seen so far. That brings your final grade to a 23 out of 30. Slightly behind the Elemental Sorcerer. Really, which one of these two you pick for your blasting depends partially on your character concept and partially on how you want to fit into your party. I like bringing Arcane spellcasters to tables where another Divine spellcaster is already there. I like bringing Primal to tables where the other caster is Occult. Ultimately, you can pick either of these two if you wish to be a blaster. It's not going to make too big a difference. They're both really good at their jobs. Next up, the Imperial Sorcerer. And I promise this is going to be the last sorcerer we look at. I was not even initially planning on including the Imperial Bloodline Sorcerer in this list because I don't consider them a blaster. To me, they're very clearly designed to be debuffers. Even in terms of single target, it's best to use them as debuffers, similar to, say, a Resentment Witch. That being said, when I was soliciting feedback on what blasters to include on this list, I kept being told that I'm missing the Imperial Sorcerer, so I figured, hey, let's include it, let's see how they perform. Unsurprisingly, to me at least, they get a fairly low grade, 21 out of 30, tied with the Oscillating Wave Psychic, very near the bottom of this list. Now might be a good time to add, every blaster considered in this video is meant to be a at least decent blaster. None of them are bad blasters. I'm not evaluating, say, a Healing Font Cleric with no good blast granted to them. I'm not evaluating a Bard. I'm not evaluating a Wood or Water Kineticist focused on control and healing. These are not things I'm evaluating. I'm evaluating characters that are at least decent at blasting, but in this list of characters, the Imperial Sorcerer is landing very close to the bottom. First, the top half of the rubric, it's all blue. Arcane has all the good offensive fundamentals. But that's where the problems start to show. Fundamentals give you a foundation, but the Imperial Sorcerer doesn't build on top of it for blasting purposes. First, you lose the same amount of versatility as the previous two sorcerers. All of your signature spells, practically. Now, in terms of efficiency, you have a one-action focus spell, which generally tends to be a really good part of efficiency for you, but specifically from a blasting perspective, it's not that good. Your one-action focus spell is an auxiliary action. It's not directly offensive. And to be clear, auxiliary actions are good, but I don't know if the one-action focus spell gives you enough value as a blaster to keep up with the other one-action options we see on this list. You can basically use Ancestral Memories, your focus spell, to reduce an enemy saving throw or increase your attack roll. The increase to your attack roll is marginal. It's not going to outcompete Sure Strike, and yeah, Sure Strike cannot be used more than once per combat, but a blaster isn't just spamming attack roll spells either. A blaster is going to be mixing in attack roll spells, saving throw spells, spells that don't do any of those things. So it's a really hard sell to me to use one action to then boost a two-action attack spell by a +1 or a +2. At the very highest levels, when it's a +3 boost, maybe. And even then, it's a status bonus, and status bonuses to your attacks tend to be fairly common, so it may not even end up mattering all that much. In terms of reducing the enemy's saving throw, this is going to perform okay. It's not going to be more reliable than just doing some one-action offensive option followed by a saving throw blast. Like Elemental Toss plus a two-action spell generally tends to be more value for the amount of actions you spent. The Imperial Sorcerer's efficiency would really shine in terms of debuffing. If this rubric was designed for debuffers and not for blasters, I would have given them a 4 out of 4 on efficiency, and the only other 4 out of 4 would have been the Resentment Witch. But because this is a blasting rubric, they get a 2 out of 4. Potency, you have Sorcerer's Potency, and you have a lot of high rank slots. You get a 3 out of 4. Reliability, again, is a 2 out of 4. I talked about this in the last video. 1 plus 2 actions, where each of them has a d20 roll associated with it, is just significantly, magnitudes more reliable than one action that then makes the d20 roll for your remaining 2 actions 5, 10, or 15% better. They're a fairly reliable character. Casters are naturally good at being reliable. They're just nowhere near as reliable as the other things we've been discussing so far and the other characters we're going to be looking at soon. And finally, for sustainability, you also get a 2 out of 4. This one is mainly because if you look at the gameplay loop, Ancestral Memories is sort of encouraging you to be a spike damage dealer or a spike condition inflictor. Like, you're trying to fish for those failures or critical failures where the enemy is really messed up by the damage or debilitating effect you stick on them. That is then in turn going to encourage you to spend higher and higher ranked spell slots every time an enemy succeeds their save. And you end up burning through your resources quite a bit faster than a lot of the other characters that we're going to be evaluating. One miscellaneous comment about the Imperial Sorcerer: your Ancestral Memories can only impact one enemy saving throw. So it doesn't really have a meaningful impact on AoE situations. So all in all, it's a 21 out of 30 for Imperial Sorcerer, the second lowest grade that I'm going to be assigning for any of the blasters today. The lowest has not been shown yet. Next up is the Stone Druid. Your fundamentals are more or less the same as the Elemental Sorcerer because you both have the primal spell list, and there's nothing exceptionally different in what your class features give you that would alter those fundamentals. So you can target everything but will, you have a couple of brute force targeting options, you have some very good damage variety, you have good riders, and you have pretty good low rank spell slot value. In terms of versatility, you end up losing a lot less of your versatility than the Elemental Sorcerer does. Why is that? One, as a prepared spellcaster, you don't have to worry about signature spells. You can just shift your spells around daily, and with clever play, you will end up having a lot more versatility day after day compared to a spontaneous caster. On top of that, your focus spells are just generically very strong. Crushing Ground is an excellent 2-action single target damage spell, and it also has a decent rider attached. And then when you get to a higher level, Stone Lance is another really good single target focus spell. Because your focus spells are so generically useful, You can leave your spell slots free. You can shuffle them around to exactly what you need on any given day. You can even shuffle them around just to have all the different riders you would want from your blasts, and that means you end up just having a lot of versatility. You don't lose that much for being a blaster because you're relying so heavily on your focus spells. So in terms of the versatility loss, you get a 3 out of 4. In terms of efficiency, you get a 2 out of 4 because you lack a 1-action focus spell and a 1-action focus cantrip, but you do have the sustain spells that Primal gives you, so you're still good. Your potency is a 3 out of 4. You have nothing spectacular that punches above your weight like the Sorcerer does or the Psychic does, but you have some incredible focus spells, and that combined with spellcasters having naturally high potency in their higher rank spell slots means you're going to have very good potency, 3 out of 4. Your reliability is a 2 out of 4. You're going to be stuck hitting Reflex and Fortitude a lot of the time, and you can't easily overload enemy defenses either. This is for 2 reasons. 1, you lack the 1-action focus spell, as we talked about, so you're not going to have those turns where you go 1 plus 2 actions all offensively used nearly as much as, say, an Elemental Sorcerer is going to have. The other way Primal Spellcasters overload enemy defenses is via Brine Dragon's Bile, which you're not as good at using as a Sorcerer would be. You have fewer spell slots than them because they're going to have 4 each of their lower ranks of spell slots while you're going to have 3. On top of that, you're a prepared spellcaster, so you are expected to prepare exactly the number of Brine Dragon's Biles you will need for a given day, alongside, say, exactly the number of Hidebounds, exactly the number of Wooden Doubles, etc. You're not going to call all of these perfectly. You're going to make some missteps. You're going to sometimes just not try to make a call and do something else with those low rank slots, like out of combat utility, whereas the Sorcerer will always have Brine Dragon's Bile when they want it. So you get a 2 out of 4 in reliability here. Finally, in sustainability, you actually get the first 4 out of 4 we have given for sustainability. Despite having fewer spell slots than the Sorcerers that we've been looking at so far, you just have an incredible 2-action focus spell. The place where a spellcaster is likeliest to expend turn after turn of maximum rank spell slots tends to be single target boss fights, because that's where the whole party's reliability is low, and that's where you're expected to punch above your weight and stick as many reliable options as possible. Because you're going to be relying on your focus spells for single target options so much, and because those focus spells are 2 actions, you don't really have to worry about overspending spell slots. A lot of combats for you are going to look like turn 1, you cast a big 2 or 3 action spell that you then sustain for the rest of combat, say Floating Flame, Cinder Swarm, Freezing Rain, etc. And then you just use those 2 action focus spells to hunt down targets throughout the combat. And you will generate great value with this, and you're really not going to be overspending spell slots. So you get the first 4 out of 4 for sustainability. That being said, the final grade is still 21.5. The Primal spell list is lacking in a few of the fundamentals that Arcane Blasters get, and ultimately the Druid class and the Stone Druid subclass are not giving you as much as, say, an Elemental Sorcerer gets from their subclass. So this is still a good option, and I would consider it in a lot of games. Say you want a Primal caster, but you want that higher bit of day-to-day versatility of being a prepared caster, then perhaps the Stone Druid is better than, say, the Elemental Sorcerer. Or perhaps you care about Order Explorer. You want to go Stone Druid, and then you also want to take Untamed Order, so you can polymorph some types for combat. So Stone Druid makes an excellent blaster that can also do other things, but if you're trying to be a dedicated blaster, it's one of the lower grades. Next up is another Druid build. This is a Storm Druid, but with the Elementalist class archetype. Now, the reason I chose Elementalist and Storm specifically is because when a Storm Order Druid takes the Elementalist archetype and picks Air as their main focus, they end up changing their focus spell from Tempest Surge to Updraft, and I consider Updraft to be the best blasting focus spell at first level. So I had high hopes for this build, and it went and scored the lowest of any of the blasters I'm evaluating today. Still a pretty good blaster. Remember, everything being covered today is at least decent, if not better. Ultimately, I wouldn't recommend it over any of the other blasters unless you had a really specific character concept in mind. So for the fundamentals, your defense targeting variety, your brute forcing ability, and your low rank value are identical to the previous Druid. Your damage type variety and your rider effects switch around. Instead of being 4 and 3, they become 3 and 4. The reason for this is you lose a little bit of damage type variety because you are limited to spells within your elemental philosophy. Specifically, this is air, water, earth, and fire. That means you lose some damage types that wouldn't have these 4 traits. So that is a tangible loss compared to a regular druid. In terms of rider, you actually gain an upgrade because Primal already has pretty good rider effects, but you have Updraft, which has one of the best riders that focus spell could possibly have. It knocks the enemy prone if they fail their saving throw. That is substantially better than, say, the Crushing Ground focus spell, which just gives them a speed penalty. On top of that, you have a lot of cool spell shapes that can stick riders onto already good spells, which also really helps you. Now, how much versatility do you lose? 2 out of 4, because you're limited to your Elementalist philosophy. Specifically, compared to a normal Druid, you don't even have the heal spell, and that is a huge downgrade. Efficiency? 1 out of 4. Good luck fitting your 2-action focus spells, your spell shapes, and sustain spells all into this action economy. This is probably one of the worst action economies you can get as a spellcaster. In terms of potency, you get a 4 out of 4. You have excellent ability to punch through enemy defenses with your focus spells, and your spell shapes can take already good spells and add so much value on top. In terms of reliability, again, it's a 2 out of 4. You're stuck hitting Reflex and Fortitude a lot of the time, just like any other Primal caster, and you can't overload defenses easily because you don't have a great action economy. In terms of sustainability, you actually have slightly better sustainability than a normal Druid because your spell shapes can really help increase your spell's value. So you get a 4 out of 4 in this regard. The final tally is then 20.5, which, as I said, is the lowest grade any of the blasters today is going to receive. Unfortunate. Still a character worth playing if it hits your character concept just right, but not the best one on the list. Next up is the Silence and Snow Witch. It is one of the best performing builds I evaluated today, and that sort of came as a shock to me too. I always thought Silence and Snow Witches were good blasters. It's just today I'm realizing they're among the best blasters in the game. In terms of their fundamentals, mostly the same as any Primal caster like the Stone Druid. So they have the same defense targeting variety, the same brute force, the same damage type variety, and the same low rank value. But they have slightly better riders. They get a 4 out of 4 here instead of a 3 out of 4. Why is that? The Primal spell list already has some good riders, and your hexes can really add to this. Clinging Ice can slow enemies down. Personal Blizzard can make everything concealed to those enemies. Elemental Betrayal can give them a weakness to a specific damage type that you or your party's alchemists can do. So you have a ton of really good rider effects. So a 4 out of 4 on that one. In terms of what you get in return for losing versatility, first, you don't lose that much versatility to begin with because your focus spells are incredibly strong. Stronger than even a Druid's focus spells. At level 10, for example, you could pick up Glacial Heart, which is a contender for one of the strongest single target focus spells you could possibly have. All of these mean that you're leaving your spell slots relatively free, similar to a Stone Order Druid. So you have a 3 out of 4, same as a Stone Order Druid. In terms of efficiency, you get a 4 out of 4. Witches have a crazy action economy. Arguably one of the best, if not the best, that a spellcaster could possibly have. You have your 1-action Hex cantrip, Clinging Ice. Every time you use it or sustain it, your familiar gets to do a thing. You also have the Cackle focus spell, which lets you sustain any spell, not just your hexes, but also your slotted spells as a free action. And Primal is full of good sustain spells to be using with this. So it's not uncommon for you to get a turn that feels like 5 actions from any other spellcaster character. Your efficiency is top notch. Your potency? It's a 3 out of 4. Ultimately, you lack those flat damage bonuses like Sorcerer's Potency or Unleashed Psyche, but you can have some seriously explosive turns when you're using Cackle correctly. Let's say on turn 1 you set up with something big, like you first did Clinging Ice, followed by Cinder Swarm. On turn 2, you can follow it up by sustaining Clinging Ice with Cackle, sustaining your Cinder Swarm with an actual action, and also casting a 2-action offensive spell. And you could have snuck in Brine Dragon's Bile as a reaction in between all of those things. So you can have really explosive turns when you want them to be. Your explosiveness comes from the fact that, unlike a lot of other casters, you can actually fit in as many maximum rank spell slots as you would like to, if you set it up correctly. Then in terms of reliability, you have all of the same overloading enemy defenses as an Elemental Sorcerer, so you get a 3 out of 4. Ultimately, you're still not the best at targeting will, but you're pretty reliable. And finally, in terms of sustainability, I gave them 1 point lower than the Stone Druid here. You end up getting a 3 out of 4. This is because even though you have some really strong focus spells, just like the Stone Druid, your action economy is so crazy that you're going to burn through them faster than a lot of other spellcasters will and still have actions to spare, which you'll probably end up spending on spell slots a lot of the time. So you will not have the best sustainability between that combined with you having fewer spell slots than sorcerers and wizards. That being said, the final grade for the Silence and Snow Witch is 24 out of 30. And that is one of the best grades that we're going to give out today. Remember, nothing's really going to get close to a 30 out of 30 because if it did, that'd be broken. Pathfinder's a balanced game where you can't really be good at every single thing. 24 genuinely is one of the highest grades you're going to see. Next up is our first divine spellcaster, the Flames Oracle. In defense targeting variety, you will surprisingly be getting a 4 out of 4. Divine is naturally very good at targeting Fortitude with spells like Concordant Choir or Sudden Blight. It also has some decent ability to target Will and Reflex, via blasts like Agnes and Despair for Will and Inner Radiance Torrent for Reflex. And of course, you can still target AC, particularly with Divine Lance, which has one of the hardest damage types to resist. Flames Oracle really supplements that well. Its granted spells will let you target Reflex with stuff like Fireball. Its domain spells, if you choose to pick them, will let you target AC. So all in all, you're excellent at varying up your defense targeting. In terms of brute force, though, divine casters don't get any of the things that usually brute force through enemy defenses. No Sure Strike, no Force Barrage, none of the standouts. I would have given a 1 out of 4, but as a Flames Oracle, you have Incendiary Aura, which means you can stick damage onto an enemy via a friend's attack roll. And not a specific friend's attack roll, you really just need one friend to hit, and then you stick persistent damage onto them. So that's what's bringing them up to a 2 out of 4 rather than a 1. In terms of damage type variety, you have fire spells, and then you have Void, Vitality, and Spirit as a divine caster. Incredibly hard to resist, 3 out of 4. The only reason you're not a 4 out of 4 is because you're not exploiting weaknesses as often as an Arcane or Primal spellcaster will. The divine spell list tends to be quite a bit more limited in terms of riders. The divine spell list gets really good if you want something that hates out a very specific type of enemy. Sudden Blight really ruins the day for diseased enemies. You have a lot of anti-fiend options and anti-undead options. But if you don't have a specific enemy type you're gearing towards, you don't have the greatest rider, so 2 out of 4. And finally, low rank spell slot value, you have a few options. You have stuff like Bloodspray Curse, but the divine spell list generally doesn't have the standouts. It doesn't have Sure Strike, doesn't have Brine Dragon's Bile, it doesn't have any of the defensive reactions. So a 2 out of 4, just because you still can do stuff with your low rank spell slots, but it's not that great. Now, in terms of what you trade your versatility for, first, you don't lose that much versatility to begin with, because divine casters weren't that versatile. You're not trading down much in the first place, so 3 out of 4. Efficiency, however, is just not your strong suit. You have a 1 out of 4 here. Most of your best options are 2 actions. The domain spell I mentioned, Fire Ray, 2 actions. Incendiary Aura takes 2 actions to set up. Your best spells, 2 actions to cast. The Divine List does not have that many 1-action spells that you'd be wanting to cast at higher levels, nor does it have many reactions for that. And on top of all of that, Incendiary Aura actually messes up your allies, because any creature that takes damage in your aura is inflicted with persistent fire damage. So now there's also the headache of making sure you're positioned in such a way that as many enemies as possible are afflicted with the aura, but none of your friends are. This also sometimes denies your friends their efficiency. They may have to move out of a favorable position because of your aura. So all in all, horrendous efficiency, 1 out of 4. Potency, 3 out of 4. You have some really explosive turns, often involving Incendiary Aura, but they're gonna take setup. So you get a 3 out of 4 just because ultimately you're taking away from your party's overall potency when you're setting up your best turns. Reliability, solid 4 out of 4. You can target all saves. You can use Foretell Harm to stick on some free damage to an enemy. You can use Incendiary Aura to overload enemy defenses without really giving them a chance to resist. 4 out of 4. And finally, sustainability, you get a 4 out of 4 on this one. You have excellent focus spells. Both your Revelation spell and your Domain spells are really good. You have full spell slot progression, the same as a Sorcerer. And then on top of that, you have Cursebound, which gives you a whole extra resource pool. Options like Whispers of Weakness, options like Foretell Harm. You can also at higher levels stick on effects like Debilitating Dichotomy, which are all incredible and don't impact your overall resource pool. So you get a 4 out of 4 on this. You are one of the most resource efficient casters in the game. All in all, that's a grade of 21.5. Not one of the best. If you do want to play a Divine Spellcaster who is also a Blaster, I would really recommend this one. You still have all the strengths of Divine to work off of, and notably, you have so many resource pools to draw from that it isn't that expensive for you to just have a few typical Divine options like Bless, Heroism, Signature Heal, etc. mixed in with your Blast, because you have the resource for everything you wish to do. So definitely something I'd recommend if you want to play a Divine Blaster, but not one of the better blasters overall. Next up, we'll be looking at the Animist, specifically the Liturgist Animist. In the brackets, I have listed 3 apparitions, and they're in an order of priority. Steward of Stone and Fire and Vanguard of Roaring Waters need to be your first 2 apparitions. Steward is your main apparition, the one you will always have on because of Earth's Bile, your 1-action focus spell. Vanguard of Roaring Waters is there to switch into if something that resists fire shows up, so that you have access to other good blasts like Hydraulic Push or Crashing Wave. Echo of Lost Moments is what you'll pick up at level 7 when you get your 3rd apparition, just in time for you to gain the 4th rank spell, Vision of Death, which will really help with your ability to keep targeting Will as you get into the higher levels. The remaining apparitions you pick are ultimately just up to you. These 3 are the important ones for a blaster. So in terms of defense targeting variety, you get a 4 out of 4. You can target all the defenses because of your granted spells from each of these apparitions that I mentioned. With regards to brute forcing through defenses, however, 1 out of 4. Divine casters are just not good at this. You don't have any of the good spells, like I said for the Flames Oracle, and while the Flames Oracle got bumped up to 2 out of 4 by Incendiary Aura, Animists get no such bumping. One very notable thing is that there is an Animist apparition that gives you Sure Strike, but then while you're using that apparition's spells, you can combine Sure Strike with something like Hydraulic Push, which you would get from the Vanguard apparition, not from the one that gave you Sure Strike. So 1 out of 4. You just don't have that good of an ability to brute force through defenses. Damage type variety, 4 out of 4. You have fire spells, you have Void, Vitality, and Spirit, very hard to resist, and you can switch apparitions to get a better damage type whenever you feel like you need it. So ultimately, you get a 4 out of 4 in this regard. In terms of riders, you get 3 out of 4. Divine spellcasters are not naturally great with riders, but your apparitions are going to give you quite a few good spells and good riders with them. Vanguard will give you Hydraulic Push. Echo is going to give you Vision of Death. So you're going to have good riders to go with the so-so riders of Divine, and that'll bump you up to 3 out of 4. And then for the low rank spell slot value, 2 out of 4, same as the Flames Oracle. Now, how much versatility do you lose? It's really hard to build an Animist that isn't versatile. The game's mechanics will fundamentally not let you do this. For example, all of your apparition spells are always signature spells, so that's not a concern for you. And you have access to a bunch of additional lores, so skills are not really that much of a concern to you. And you're primarily wisdom based, so you just have an incredibly versatile character. Remember that with a lot of the other blasters, you can make the choice to lose versatility. That's why, for example, the Elemental Sorcerer is a 2 out of 4. The Animist is not allowed to make that choice. The game will not let them. So they end up at a 3 out of 4. In terms of efficiency, much like the Witch, you have a wildly good action economy. Earth's Bile is an amazing 1-action focus spell for what it lets you do. Dancing Invocation lets you sustain other spells as a free action while you're moving around the battlefield. Remember, it allows you to do so as a step or a leap. So if you're worried about reactions, you will step. And if you want to gain as much movement as possible, you would leap. And presumably you would have items and feats that boost your leaping capabilities. You have a variety of feats that give you apparition reactions, which can also sneak in some value in there. Between all of these, you have some insane action compression. And your potency is also a 4 out of 4. Earth's Bile is the best one-action focus spell in the game. There's one other that I'll be covering later that's almost as good, but Earth's Bile is definitely better. So that alone is a huge boost to your potency because you get a one-action focus spell that ultimately is really strong for a one-action focus spell. You also get Channeler Stance, which lets you upgrade the damage of Earth's Bile if you wish to. On top of that, you have as many spell slots as a sorcerer for most of your career, so you have insane potency. In terms of reliability, you have a 3 out of 4. You can target all the saving throws, and you have the ability to overload a lot of defenses. Likewise for sustainability, excellent focus spells, and full slot progression, you get a 3 out of 4. Tally all of these up, and you end up at a 24 out of 30. Tied with the Silence in Snow Witch, and that shouldn't be a surprise, because the Silence in Snow Witch had an insane action economy, and so do you. We haven't gotten to the best yet, but they're both tied for the second best. Next up is good old faithful, the Wizard. This wizard has the School of Battle Magic and has the Spell Blending Thesis. Now, I would say that before all the power creep that blasters received over the course of Rage of Elements, Player Core 1, Player Core 2, this would have been one of the better blasters in the game. I think a 22.5, the grade that this wizard receives, would have been on the higher side. Only the Elemental Sorcerer would have beaten them, really, out of all the ones we've covered so far. The rest either didn't exist or didn't have a lot of the things they have now. You can see how far it's fallen behind. Now this wizard is really middle of the pack for a blaster. It's not bad by any measure, but it's not in the top 5 that I've covered today. That being said, let's look at the grades breakdown. For the fundamentals, most of them are blues, just like any arcane spellcaster, but your low rank spell slot value gets a 3 out of 4. Why is that? Arcane is naturally amazing at generating value from these slots, but wizards have curriculum locked slots, which limits the variety you can generate from them. And second, you're a spell blending wizard. You're just not gonna have that many low rank spell slots. The whole reason you played a spell blending blaster is to have as many spell slots in your top 3 ranks as possible. So between curriculum locking, which yes, you can blend away, but then the reality of having to blend away slots, you're not gonna have that much low rank value. So 3 out of 4. You're still good on this because you're an arcane caster, not as good as the other arcane casters we looked at. Now, how much versatility do you lose? Plenty, actually. Between curriculum slots, blending, and the fact that trying to blast, you're not going to be that versatile. Arcane spellcasters are built to be versatile, and you would be voluntarily giving up a lot of that versatility to blast. Efficiency, you do have a one-action focus spell, but you have no significant action compression beyond that. You don't have focus spells like Cackle that the Witch gets. You don't have anything like Blood Magic that the Sorcerer gets. You don't have a focus cantrip that you can keep spamming the way a Witch does. And notably, Wizards can't get 3 focus points natively. They have to dip into another class for it. Natively, you're only getting 2 focus points, so even your one-action focus spell, not that usable. If you're playing this wizard, I would recommend picking up a bow if you can. 2 out of 4 in efficiency. Potency, you get 3 out of 4. You have a ton of extra max rank slots, which is really good potency, but ultimately you're lacking some of those punches that other classes get. Sorceress Potency, Blood Magic, Cackle, Channeler Stance, Unleash Psyche, all of these have shown so much ability to punch above the weight of even what a max rank spell slot does. So yes, you'll have good value from these, but you're not among the best in this regard. Reliability, of course, 4 out of 4. Arcane is the most reliable spell list offensively, and you have Force Bolt, which not only overloads the action economy like we talked about with the Elemental Sorcerer using the 1-action Elemental Toss and a 2-action spell, but it also just auto damages, so it's actually better than those. So you get a 4 out of 4 on reliability. And finally, you have sustainability. Despite being spell blending, you actually get a 2 out of 4 on this one. First, you have the problem of only having 2 focus points without archetyping, like I mentioned. And secondly, spell blending gives you more spell slots, but you're also more reliant on those spell slots than any other blaster. So it's not uncommon for you to use 2 or 3 of them, where another blaster may have just used 1 or 2 of them. So you're going to burn through them relatively fast, so you get a 2 out of 4. Ultimately, your grade is 22.5, middle of the pack among all the blasters I consider good enough to play. And now, for the final build we'll be presenting today, the one that seals the deal by landing top spot. Wrath Runelord Wizard. This is the newest option by far, and therefore is the one nobody's really talking about. It came out a little less than a month ago with Lost Omen's Rival Academies, and the old version of the Wrath Runelord was not one of the best blasters in the game. It's just the new one that is. Let's get into why. First, let's look at the fundamentals. The first three are the same as any other arcane spellcaster. But then, in terms of rider effects and low rank spell slot value, you lose a point compared to, say, an Arcane Sorcerer. The reason for this is the Runelord Anathemas. Can't Create is a huge anathema to have. It means you cannot use a lot of area of effect spells that would count as creating something in the area. So Rust Cloud and Ash Cloud, for example, are not usable. Likewise, your low rank spell slot value is going to be written off by the other part of your anathema that you can't protect, because that's going to stop your defensive reactions. That's going to stop you from using Hidebound. That's going to stop you from using Wooden Double. That's going to stop you from using Unexpert Transposition. Any spell that explicitly exists to protect you, it's a goner. So you're really going to be relying on Shore Strike and Brine Dragon's Bile for low rank value, which is good. You're still getting a 3 out of 4. You're just not as good as other arcane spellcasters on this. With regards to what you trade your versatility for, this is by far the most specialized of the blasters we have looked at. You get a 1 out of 4 on your versatility. Your Runelord Anathemas mean you're really struggling to do anything that's not blasting. For example, you can protect your friends. You definitely can give them temp HP. That counts as protecting. You cannot create walls, which takes away a good chunk of what high-level wizards do if they're not blasting. Your anathemas are pushing you towards blasting, so you get a 1 out of 4 in this regard. When people have been asking for a specialized blaster, this is Paizo's answer to you. This is how you specialize as a blaster. You get anathemas that write off a bunch of arcane spells, and then you get all these other benefits that make you better and better of a blaster. First, efficiency. Vengeful Glare on its own is enough to make your efficiency a 3 out of 4. It's a 1-action focus spell and is really good for a 1-action focus spell. It does 1d4 heightened by 1d4 damage, which is a little less than Earth's Bile, and it sticks 1 persistent damage. But the thing is, you can change its damage type between fire and cold. So 1, it makes you basically incapable of it being resisted, and it makes you fairly likely to target weaknesses, because fire and cold often tend to be duals. When you resist or are immune to one, you can target the other and likely hit a weakness. On top of that, though, the persistent damage is also either fire or cold. So you can stick fire and cold persistent damage by using this with 2 separate damage types and 2 separate turns and really up your efficiency. So you get a 3 out of 4. You're not doing anything wildly impressive like a Witch or an Animist, but it's really up there. Potency. You have twice as many maximum rank spell slots as a normal wizard. You have your 3 normal spell slots, you have your curriculum slot, which is a lot more versatile than a normal wizard's curriculum slot. Then you have a staff that at a baseline is going to give you 2 extra spell slots on top of that, because the staff comes with all the charges a staff would have, which is enough to cast 1 max rank spell, and then another set of those charges if you fuse a staff with your spear. So that's 6 max rank spell slots. Then you have Drain Bonded Item for a 7th max rank spell slot. So you have way more spell slots than anyone else in the game. You have as many spell slots as a Cleric, and unlike the Cleric, you can cast more than just heal and or harm. You can cast any of your Sin spells, and your Sin spells are all pretty good. On top of that, you have options like Sin Bladed Spell, you have Vengeful Glare, and you have Personal Runewell, which can really up your potency. Personal Runewell, of course, has the caveat of needing setup, so it's not something you spam. You only use it when you have setup time in a combat, but all these other things already make you so incredibly potent, and then the little minority of times you get to use Personal Runewell, it feels even better. So 4 out of 4 on this front. Reliability. Arcane is the most reliable spell list, and you have Vengeful Glare, which is overloading enemy defenses, so 4 out of 4. In terms of sustainability, 4 out of 4. You have way more spell slots than anyone else. You even have 2 more max rank spell slots than the Spellblending Wizard does, and you have a good focus spell to pack things out with, so it's a 4 out of 4. Overall, this makes their grade 25 out of 30. In my opinion, they are the best blaster caster in the game. If a new player comes to the table and says, I want to play a blaster caster and I really don't want to think about doing things that are not blaster casters, they can either consider Fire Kineticist or they could consider the Wrath Runelord. Both of these are excellent options now, and the Wrath Runelord will probably feel more like an explosive blaster. In my opinion, Paizo did a really good job of making the Runelord a great example of a specialized blaster without just giving them something boring like a passive numbers boost. With all of that, we have the final standings for the 11 blaster casters I consider today. This is not an exhaustive list. There are other blaster caster builds that may perform slightly better or worse than some of the builds on here. For example, I didn't consider other psychic conscious minds. I didn't consider the Kineticists, which, while not actually using spells and spell slots, is still a blaster caster in many important ways. I didn't consider Clerics, who can make for good blasters when built in a very specific way. This is really just 10 builds that I consider emblematic of how blasters function in Pathfinder, and then Runelord Wizard right at the top. The Wrath Runelord is truly an outstanding blaster. It hits almost everything you would expect a blaster to hit, and it pays a price for it. Its versatility truly is bad. Remember, all of these other blasters, with the notable exception of the Oscillating Wave Psychic, can still do things that are not blast. You can still buy scrolls to do other things. You still have lower rank spell slots. You still have a staff. The Wrath Runelord Wizard is never going to be able to cast spells that create or protect. And that eliminates a huge number of arcane spells. So it makes sense that it gets to be such a good blaster for how specialized it is. If anything, I would say this is indicative of how far behind psychics have fallen and need a bit of a boost if they do ever get a remaster. Then in ranks 2, 3, and 4, we have 3 different, roughly equally good blasters. The Silence Is No Witch, the Liturgist Animist, and the Elemental Sorcerer. They all give nature-y, elementally vibes, with some leaning more towards one element than another. But ultimately, they all are very similar blasters and they perform well. One is intelligence, one is wisdom, one is charisma based. None of them carry the heavy flavor impact of being a Wrath Runelord, of being associated with a sin. So they're all excellent considerations for blasters. If you're a new player and you just want to pick what you think is the best blaster, pick one of these top 4. You really cannot go wrong with them. They're going to perform really well if you just put a little bit of effort into making sure you understand how they tick and how to use their options as best as possible. Then we have the Draconic Sorcerer and the School of Battle Magic Spellblending Wizard. Both of these are middle-of-the-pack blasters. If you wish to build any of them as purely a blaster, you can. You will wish you had at least a little bit of stuff other than blasting, though, because they're not going to be the best at their job. You might wish you had picked up a bow. You might wish you picked up a few crowd control spells. And that is perfectly fine. The wizard of these two in particular is indicative of how far ahead the remaster has pulled all of the good blaster caster options. And I think that's a good thing. I think players who want to be able to build a blaster should be able to specialize into that role. And then below the wizard, we have the bottom half of the good blasters. Remember, I keep calling them good blasters because you'll still blast with them and you'll still feel good. But ultimately, they'll feel like they're lagging behind a little. For some of them, like the Flames Oracle or the Imperial Sorcerer, it's because the stuff they get from their class and or their subclass ultimately isn't supporting the blasting fantasy. And at least in the Sorcerer's case, it's not really meant to. The Imperial Sorcerer is very much meant to be more of a debuffer and less of a blaster. In the case of the Druid and the Psychic, I would say it's indicative that both of these classes need a little bit more oomph to become better blasters, and that they're starting to lag behind with how far ahead other options are pulling. That being said, these are still good blasters. If you as a new player came to me and said you wanted to play Aang from Avatar: The Last Airbender, I would recommend the 11th ranked spot on this list over anything else on the list. That character is going to feel more like Aang than any of the others. So just remember that when evaluating this. Just remember that when using the rubric to evaluate your own blasters. Any score that's 20 or above is still worth playing as a blaster. It's just the lower you are, the closer you are to 20, the more you should consider having a few non-blastery things. Maybe as a Stone Druid, you will carry heals and or control spells. Maybe it's an Oscillating Wave Psychic. You might use Parallel Breakthrough to pick up something like Amped Shield from one of the other Conscious Minds. That'll be all for today's video, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed seeing both my methodology in part 1 of this video and my rankings ultimately in this video. If you agree or disagree with any of the rankings, feel free to share it in the comments section. If you want to share a rubric for one of the characters I evaluated that you evaluate differently, or for one of your own characters that I didn't really consider, feel free to share it in the comments section. And if you have any play experience that either agrees or disagrees with my rankings by a huge margin, feel free to tell me. I'd be happy to discuss it with you. Part 3 of this video will be coming out in the future, and it will have build guides for some of the blasters on this list. I'm not going to be doing all 11 of them because that is a tall ask, especially because I'm going to be accompanying them with written guides. Maybe 5 or so, maybe the top 5, maybe a sample selection that I think will be helpful to new players. Let's see. If you want access to the written build guides that will be coming out with that video, consider joining a channel membership. It is a relatively cheap way to directly support me without worrying about advertisements, and it'll give you little perks like those build guides. Otherwise, if you like this video, please like, comment, and or subscribe. It's a great way to support the channel and ensures that I can keep making videos for you in the future. Otherwise, I'll see you next time with my next video.